About 5 weeks ago, I proxied for Captain Cook by way of a DVD, but we're blessed and honored that he's healthy and is able to be here in person today. I would like to recap very quickly what I said 5 weeks ago. Immediately after December 7th, 1941, over 16 million men and women were handed the job of saving our nation and the world. Many of those patriots were straight out of high school, as was our guest. You might also recall Jack Sargent commenting that as a 13-year-old boy, he heard a blow-by-blow description of D-Day, fast forwarding a few years, occurring June 6, 1944. Our speaker today was making that news, piloting a C-47 aircraft filled with paratroopers in the skies over Normandy, in the dark, and in the way of more harm than anybody should have to bear. Next June, that will be 70 years ago. I am privileged, honored, and humbled to introduce Captain Arnold Cook, United States Air Force. May I turn on your microphone? Okay. You won't have to talk quite so loud. I will have a volume in the back to control. If anybody is having too much volume coming from back here, wave at me and I'll control it.
Let me say that it's a privilege for me to be here, and I'm quite honored for the invitation. I'd like to start out in preparation for D-Day, and it all started at Bergstrom Army Airfield in 1942 and 43. The 316th Troop Care Group that I flew with on D-Day was based at Bergstrom and departed there overseas. And they went down through South America, St. Island, across Africa, wound up at Cairo, Egypt. They followed Montgomery across North Africa, participated in D-Day of Sicily and Africa. Then in 1944, they moved to England. My flying career started, as far as the C-47 was concerned, at Bergstrom Army Airfield in 1943. And after going from Bergstrom to a couple of other fields, I flew a C-47 through South America, St. Island, up West Africa, across to England. I got to England about 3 weeks after the 316. Now, let me start again. When I started overseas, I know all of you have heard things about hot pilots. Well, I wasn't a hot pilot. I was just a walking sheet of blue flame in my mind. I mean, it was something else. And then when I arrived in Cottesmore, a place in England, got to wondering what 316 was all about. How many of you knew that there were enlisted pilots in the Army Air Force? About 55% of the pilots that departed Bergstrom Field in 1942 were staff sergeants. The commander, Sir Macaulay, back in the 20s, he was a staff sergeant pilot. But then I got to hearing about all of these distinguished units. They had 2 distinguished unit citations when I joined. They had flown not just hours, but hundreds of hours of combat chasing the bomb all across Africa, departed in Sicily and so forth. So I was quite humbled And that blue jet of flame come down to something like a burned out match that you just lit a cigarette with yesterday. But getting ready for D-Day, I had never flown formation with a C-47. And I found myself flying night formation the first time I ever flew. And then towing gliders, dropping paratroopers, all of that was brand new to me. But we were getting there. And it was an experience that is just hard to describe. You've been flying a solo airplane, and all at once you find yourself with about 50 or 60 airplanes around you. And at night, you're flying close enough to where you can almost read the numbers of the paperwork that the co-pilot's holding in the other airplane. Wings just almost touching. And that in itself was kind of scary. But on D-Day, we got two briefings. We got the first one on the 4th. And I think the paperwork here shows that I was 22 years old on the 3rd day of June, briefed the next day for D-Day. And the briefing was that we were going to be leading the groups and so forth. But I'd like to stop right here and describe what a paraglide amounted to back in those days. The first people going in would be the pathfinders. How many of you have heard about how the airborne was scattered all over the peninsula? Well, they went to where the pathfinders told them to go. Now, what the pathfinders were was a group of people, depending on the area they're going into, but usually it was about 5 to 7 paratroopers. They would go in about an hour and a half before the HR for us to drop. They would set up a receipt or a transmitting station back then. It was brand new, called Rebecca. And the airplane, by the way, we were over at Hearn. They had a C-47 over there that had the Rebecca antennas on it. And the next time you see a C-47 around, look right under the cockpit windows. There was a little antenna there. That was the Rebecca antennas. That was her broadcast antenna. The reception was on an oscilloscope. That was the forerunner of the TV scope. And the navigator could bring you right up over top of that transmitting station. They also marked it with what they call the halophane T. This was a big plastic T that was put out, rolled out on the ground. That's about 30 feet long, 6 feet wide, and had a stem about the same size. That was just like a T. And you were supposed to fly the stem of the T. Well, that was the secret of it. Now, to scatter the airborne, the pathfinders were, well, let me describe the thing. You got about 700, or about 875 airplanes that's got paratroopers on them. Half of them got 82nd Airborne, and the other half have got 101st Airborne. And you want those people to be over the drop zones at the same time, or basically the same time. And you're going to fly the same track, both of them. Now, I think you have in the handout you have as a track showing the departure. Here. To figure this thing out, if you look at it at Southampton, now my outfit was up here at the northeast corner, up in the upper right-hand corner. That was the only 82nd up there. Now, if you look down below, there's 101st, right below that. And at the point of Villa, Portland, was a point that the leaders of these outfits had to fly precise altitude, a precise airspeed, because they're going to be congregated or coming in together at this one point. And it'll be a a troop carrier, 82nd Troop Carrier Wing, and then 101st Wing. So this is what they're going to fly the same route again, one group right behind the other, maybe 5 minutes or something like that. At night, and if you're not on track, and if you're not on time, you could have one heck of a mess out there. So then if you follow that on down the way, you'll see out over the North Sea, they split. And that's the turning point. They want both of them across the peninsula at the same time. And all of this is at night. And the only markings that you have on the C-47 at that particular time was 3 little lights about the size of a silver dollar on top of the wing, on top of the fuselage. And that's what you're supposed to be flying formation of. Now, my group led the 52nd Wing up here, 52nd Wing. We led the 52nd Wing on that particular thing. And I'll say this much. I know that we were where the pathfinder told us to go. When the navigator said over the deal, in other words, he was reading Eureka Rebecca. What the Eureka was, that was the transmitting station on the ground. The Rebecca was the receiving station in the airplane. And he called us on target, and I was flying co-pilot, and proud to be there. I stood up and looked out the windshield of the airplane, and the halophane T went under the nose of the airplane. You can see the reflection of it. Now, how many of you would be flying, like to be flying through? You've seen the fireworks with all the sparks flying. That would be sort of like tracers. The sky was full of them. And when you learned between every tracer, there was 5 bullets that you didn't see. And we went through that thing. I don't see how in the world we didn't get hit one time that night. Because we got straight on across the peninsula, out over the Utah beach, and then the dim daylight hours over there, we only had about, at that time of the year, the nights were very short, just like, well, if you look at a map of the world, and look at that part of the world, it's the equivalent of about where Chicago and Boston would be on the map, or north. And it was just, you could see the outline of the ships out there in that bay. You could feel like you could just jump from one to the other. And we went on home when we were briefed on the 5th of June for the 6th drop. And on both briefings we had, we were told we would be lucky if we got 50% of a plane back. We got 100%. Then the next day, we went in on the 7th of June, and we went in over Utah Beach and dropped from about 700 feet. We were hauling ammunition. On the C-47, you could equip it underneath the belly, attach these racks. Power racks, we call them. You could put 6 of them under the belly, attach them to the belly of the airplane. And this thing back had a bomb shackle in it that you could hook up a power rack underneath there on this bomb shackle. And you could drop it just like you'd be dropping bombs. Then we had bundles that the crews kicked out the door. We're going in about 700 feet, and even a man with an old German monster could hit you down there. And we went in and made a turn over the drop zone and come back out over Utah Beach. And again, you couldn't see them in the daylight, but you could hear them. We had 260-some holes in the airplane. All of us in the left wing or behind the cargo door in the empennage. And it was quite an experience to happen. The 316th, I'd like to go a little bit about that one. For the work that they did on that, or we did, the unit received another distinguished unit citation. And then we went on further. The whole thing, as far as I'm concerned, was worth it. And going back, if I was younger, I'd still want to be fighting the war with them. And It was to me, after it's all over with, looking back, I feel like I'm one of the luckiest people that ever got down the road. I've been married to the same woman for 63 years, got wonderful grandchildren, got a wonderful daughter, and being able to come down and say howdy to these good folks down here is just a great, great pleasure. Now, for a couple of minutes, questions, I'll take them. That night we dropped at 800 feet.
How about your supplies?
It depended on the next day we were at 700 feet.
Yeah.
Now, the third time we went into Normandy was the D-Day plus about 6. And we landed behind the beaches. They had put down a temporary strip. And we took whole blood and hospital supplies into a field hospital and brought wounded down. And the troop carrier mission, when we weren't flying like that, was hauling gasoline, ammunition, food, whatever, across France, keeping up with Patton. And I know at Metz, France, when somebody took in some 10-in-1 rations. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of a 10-in-1 ration, but it'd be a box so big. And there's enough rations in that for 10 men for one day. And he would let us offload them. He says, we can live off the land, I need gasoline going home. And that was just the way it was. Checking him with hauling gasoline in 55-gallon drums. We could put 115 5-gallon jerry cans in that C-47 and take them off and hand them out to the trucks. And I was privileged to land in Paris, one of the first airplanes landing in Paris. How many of you have heard of corned pork? I had 5,000 pounds of corned pork to come out of Argentina. That's the first food we hauled into Paris. So it was quite something. We stayed over there until D-Day. I mean, until the end of the war. And it got to be where you could go to Paris on vacation or a few days off, and it made it all worthwhile.
What altitude were you at when you took the ground fire? Still at 800 feet?
800 feet.
800. Wow.
And that was the best altitude because it let the paratroopers get down on the ground fast in a hurry. And this way the chute would open and they would not be swaying when you hit the ground. By the way, how many of you have seen pictures of paratroopers that look like there's a big block of something right below them? When these paratroopers went aboard the airplane, they had so much weight on them. They had 2 chutes, a pack under the back chute, and then they had another pack of about 65 or 70 pounds in it, and it had a lanyard tied to it behind his leg. And he was carrying that thing to get on board the airplane. And he jumped with it in his hands because the parachute was automatically open. As soon as he got out and the chute open, he would drop that thing and be hanging about 15 feet below him. And it would hit the ground first, and it was open. He would have the shock, absorbing the shock with that extra 65 pounds on it. And every paratrooper went out with one of those bundles in front of him. And it would be survival gear, ammunition, whatever that he thought he needed to they put in there. And in between times, we'd be flying not only the vehicles, but we'd drop the parachute training, continuously training. And to me, they were quite a bunch. And looking back, I wouldn't take any effect of the experiences we had.
How many paratroopers did one C-47 carry?
We had 28. 28 of each airplane. Now the Pathfinders would vary from 5 to about 15 depending on where they were going and so forth. But most of the time it's 5 to 7 paratroopers in the Pathfinder unit. And they would go down, and usually they got there about an hour and a half before we were supposed to be there. They would set up the Eureka Rebecca stuff, put out the halophane tea, and they also put in the non-directional radio beacons. So we had several things to navigate on going to the spot. The 82nd had 3 drop zones. And each drop zone had probably 2 pathfinders going to it. And that would be a kind of a backup, you might want to say. And they would go in, set this stuff up, and then we'd fly to that pathfinder site, drop the troopers, and come home. And it was an experience. And only thing I can say is that looking back, it was one of the experiences that I never expected when I joined the Army. I joined the Army as an 18-year-old, 1940. Wanted to go to the Air Corps, couldn't do it because I had to go overseas to do it. My mother didn't want me to go overseas. Back then, there was no such thing as training centers. When you enlisted in the military back then, you enlisted for a position in an organization somewhere. And the only place I get in the Air Corps then was in Panama. So I wound up in the Coast Artillery and aircraft. In the winter of 1940, I had my first taste of what the war looked like. The British brought their 90mm gun and the 40mm automatic weapons to Fort Monroe, Virginia to demonstrate to us what they could do with them. They were radar controlled. The United States had 90mm anti-aircraft guns and 37mm automatic weapons. And these were all with visual and audio type fire control. And if we got, well, we were shooting practice ammunition and an explosion and little balls about the size of marbles go out. When we get 2 or 3 in the sack, they would know we knew it. They could cut the target in pieces with that radar. So we pulled my battery, pulled the guns to Aberdeen, Maryland, and Franklin Arsenal to be copied, and that's where the 90mm aircraft that comes from. So I got a taste of the war early. And how many of you heard of the Army Mine Planning Service? The Army in 1940-41 was using more hemp ropes than even the Navy was using. Now the Mine Planning Service was marine mines put across ship channels in American harbors, and they were shore controlled. And through a series of L boats and yellow boats and the mine planner was still about 200 feet or 35 feet. Because we'd line up 18 mines across the ship channel. Each mine would have a microphone in it. And this would go through a series of cables to shore and using the Coast Artillery fire control observation stations that could plot where those mines were. And I spent 1942 putting mines in Chesapeake Bay, Hampton Roads, Delaware River, and it was in Portland, Maine when I got my appointment to go pilot training. So it's been a very long career. So gentlemen, if there's no questions, I appreciate your attention and thank you for coming.
Would you take a minute and describe a little bit of your primary pilot training background?
Well, I started out pilot training, and I got my appointment in December of 1942 to go to pilot training. And I went to Maxwell Air Force Base for the pre-flight. And I was not an aviation cadet, I was an aviation student because I was enlisted there. And I expected to graduate as a staff sergeant, but they changed it to when they had a flight officer, which was in the Army, same as the warrant officer. I graduated from went to Albany, Georgia for primary training and was flying steerman. And I was fortunate enough, I think I enjoyed that phase of training more than any others. You had 65 hours of flying time there, and you had 3 check rides. And the 40-hour check and the 60-hour check was whether you made it or not. Well, I took the 60-hour check when I had 50 hours. So the last 15 hours I was in primary, I got to fly most of them solo. so I could just go out and play with that old airplane. It was instructor flying about every 3 or 4 times. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned a lot about flying acrobatics. Then from there I went to Bainbridge, Georgia, in BT-13s. Now, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen it because they got a few of them flying around. The bulky vibrators, they call them. And that vibration, when you pull it up and stall it, it starts descending, it would shake on you. That's where they got the vibrator. And my instructor was an RAF exchange pilot. And we got into acrobatics just at the tail end of the first month that we were there. And he was always showing off. And he'd come down to acrobatics and we were about 8,000 feet. And he said, show me what you learned in primary and acrobatics. And I just turned the whole airplane upside down and pushed the nose up and let it stall. And that's the first time I had tried that. And both of us had wished for otherwise. Number one, I have to tell you this, they had what they call a relief tube in the airplane, under the seats. And that thing can get plugged up. You turn that airplane upside down, you get a bath. And his plugged up on us. And from there, I went to advance. We were flying AT-10s, twin-engine airplanes. And I got to fly the AT-9, we were at Valdosta, Georgia. And I had a couple of experiences there that taught me to slow down in my thinking. We were flying at night, and we were on a round robin. And the first turn that we made was over just north of Jacksonville, Florida. And something hit us and knocked my airspeed out. And I'll never forget it now. I felt a kid in the other seat. I was in the left seat, he was in the right seat. You only get out on the right side of the airplane. And we went on, got back close to the base, and I decided I better tell them something. So I told them, they said, well, head down to the Gulf of Mexico and bail out. Well, I thought I was going to have to knock Cook around, and I told them, no, I'm going to land the airplane. And they wondered how I was going to do it. And I said, well, I know what the power settings are from coming down final approach, and that's what I'm going to use. So I did, and I got a little bit of a pat on the back for that. And then about a month, 6 weeks later, I was in the 10 again, and the gear wouldn't come down. And then again, they said, head it out over the Gulf and bail out. I said, let me land it. Well, how many of you noticed on DC-3, about so much of the wheel sticks down below the cowling? And if you get the props where they were one blade sitting straight up, you can land the DC-3 and not hurt the airplane too much. Well, the 10 was the same way. And I landed the 10 at night and didn't damage the airplane at all. And I reckon it kind of paid off. I was very fortunate going through the cadets. And when I was in primary at Albany, Georgia, I was a group cadet, group commander. And battalion commander, I'll get it right in a minute. When I got to basic, they selected me to be a plumber commander. And when I got to advance, I wasn't anything until I got to upper class, and they said, we want you to go up as an executive officer at WWII. So I retired and went through the upper class, second half of my advanced training as a colonel. And I knew I was going to become a flight officer, but I don't know why I wound up as a second lieutenant. And I was real proud of that. So we go on there to Bergstrom. We got to Bergstrom. I thought that was the biggest thing that ever come down. It was just a big old C-47 like a cloud. And it was a beautiful airplane to fly, and I loved it. And just to give you an idea, I was on active duty from November 43 to December 46. And C-47 was my airplane. I got out, going to make $1 million, like start there and went back in and made me a master surgeon. And I went back, went to Korea and come back as a first lieutenant, got back on active duty flying C-47. And the rest of my career until 1960, I was current in the C-47. I retired, went to Houston, Texas, flying for the oil field supply company on DC-3s. In 1963, NASA started the Apollo program, and they recruited 200 engineers out of the Air Force, signed them in the Houston office. They were all pilots, so they had to fly so much each month, pay a check on it. And the Air Force says, due to Vietnam, we don't have the personnel resources to furnish you the instructors to set this thing. So the Air Force hired me to do it. So I flew for the Air Force there for 5 more years, basic airplane C-47. And the FAA hired me, sent me to the Academy of Oklahoma City, and I taught there for 3 years, and I was still current in DC-3. I went to the field as an air carrier inspector, and I had my APR in the DC-3 plus 11 other airplanes when I retired. And I retired in 1984, and Billy and I hit the road, and we traveled for 15 years in a plus motor over the North American continent. And we retired fully in 84, and that's all. That's it. We just career learning AWAC gasoline. So that's about it, and I want to say thank you all again for the attention that you've given me and the opportunity to talk to you. And if I can ever be of service, all you got to do, give me a holler.